All right. So
Hi.
with Jake Bowman, and he was my partner in Radio Titans during the downtown LA phase. And he also was one of the key players of a group called Fireside Troop that was very important to the whole scene. And so now we're going to talk about how we met and about downtown LA. So, Jake, what is your recollection of how we met? And remember, try to keep the answers within a couple of minutes, so that they're manageable.
Sure. Um, well, I think first of all, I should clarify. My legal name is Kimberly Bowman.
Okay.
Um, that right there is Kimberly Bowman Jr. and Kimberly Bowman Sr., my grandfather. And yeah, so here I am. Jake was a nickname I sort of grew up with in California. So I was born in North Carolina, but raised out west. And it sort of became my stage name or show name or what have you as I developed this show. So I guess it all began when you reached out to my existing show, Fireside Tales of the Silver Sun, which was at Silver Lake, right at sunset, thus the Silver Sun, and as in there's a band as well. So it was this show that began as a storytelling venue. So I guess I just fell into storytelling accidentally. I was in LA. I was staying on a sailing boat in San Diego, outfitting it for a cruise across the South Pacific. And at the last minute, I came back up to Santa Monica and helped my aunt out with like a show business thing she was doing, and stayed in Santa Monica and didn't sail away. Decided there was more adventure in the city, and got sponsored to go out and find it. So I found the storytelling circuit. Was the first show was The Moth. And I was at The Moth, and didn't even realize they were pulling people out of the audience to be in the show. But so I got grabbed, and I was like, yeah, I have a story, and yeah, I can tell a story. And the guy I was with kind of encouraged me. He was I guess the first fan. And so they called me up, and I just did a story. The theme was stranded. And I remembered a time I was stranded at a gas station in Slovenia. I was hitchhiking through Yugoslavia during the Civil War. It's a long story, how a dumb teenager comes up with something like that. But so it got a lot of laughs. And as a result, I thought, oh, well, storytelling, that's kind of a fun way to play with show business types and theater geeks and all the circus freaks in Hollywood. And so I began going to all the kind of storytelling shows. And that's when I knew, I guess the artist James Houlihan probably be strongly featured in this, because he was sort of the magnet that brought us all together. He was someone I knew from Boston, where I went to school, and we connected over Facebook in LA. He was doing a show with Julian Hochbard and Night of Song, which was how we met John Mark Owens at the Cafina Galleria, which was the venue on Sunset in Silver Lake. So I met John Mark, and I told him about doing the storytelling thing, and he wanted to start a storytelling thing. So we did. And since Jules and James were there from the beginning, a lot of musicians showed up. Of course, Lorna was there from the beginning. She was always the graphic eye and into the surrealist games and the other theater experimental stuff we did. So that's kind of how Fireside Tales took off. Was all the Hollywood storytelling people I knew from the circuit were like, yeah, baby, of course we'll come to your show. And of course they never showed. But who did show up were all these musicians and, actors and people. So, we ended up like writing a play, and then inside the play, we discovered a rock opera. That's what became Feel, or what we now call the Lay of Maya and Manuel. And that played first at the Cafina Galleria, and then that show was playing at Rafa's, which is where I remember actually meeting up with you Was that before or after we met at El Cid?
No, El Cid was the first. I mean, my recollection. I mean, I'll share the story in my interview longer, but
Yeah.
I did reach out looking for places to perform at. You called me one morning, and you convinced me to meet you at El Cid.
Okay,
And
the El Cid was
yeah,
where we met. I got it.
yeah,
It's my favorite bar. It's so perfect, East Hollywood,
yeah.
Colonial California. I love that aesthetic. With Birth of a Nation, was like film next door kind of thing.
Wow, wow.
Yeah, so there's really good energy at that venue, and the whole gang was out in force. So you were sort of bowled over, especially by one. And I remember there's another story about Melanie Keller I want to tell, and because this happened at Rotha's, where one of the local Echo Park kind of hipster snobs was like, "Yeah, your show's all right, but you need a really cool alternative act." And I was like, "Well, who's a cool alternative act for you around here?" And he's like, somebody with real artistic sensibility, like Melanie Keller. And I was like, actually, I think she's sitting with my partner over there. You want to come say hi? So,
Wow.
So it was like, yeah, there was a lot of kids were hood famous, is the expression, right?
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
So, okay, so we met at El Cid. I was blown away by your whole team, which remind me to tell that story on my interview. Yeah, so we decided. I had made a commitment to people, to my friends who were very concerned after my eviction in Hollywood. I wanted to immediately run back into it with a new group, and they all said, whoa, take your time, wait till January. We got evicted in August. And so you and I started hatching plans. And what I remember was that I had arranged for a one-room studio in the block, which was these elaborate suites of offices in the skyscraper that formerly was known as Verizon Tower at Macy's Plaza at 7th and Fig in Los Angeles, or 7th and Hope. And it was such a iconic location because the city's metro subway system would say, at this stop, Macy's Plaza. And so we were in a place that was famous citywide. To me, the vibe was like it was LA's 30 Rock, at least for us. We got to this incredible building, 24/7 access. And we had all these kids like running around, like you're a few years younger than me. Everybody else was
job ever.
So what?
My worst babysitting job ever. No.
Oh my God, yeah. So what I was going to say is, what did you? How did you pull off? I had one room that was reserved, and then the day that we were supposed to move in and sign the papers, the manager tells me, "Sorry, we have to rent it to somebody else." I got pissed, and then I called you, and the next thing you said, "Okay, I'm going to handle this." And then you called me and said, "You got to get downtown." And by the time I got downtown, a couple hours later, we had a 6-room office suite available to us for 6 months for the price of one room. How did you pull that off?
Sacred geography.
Okay. Like what?
Well, you remember the Caffeine Galleria was an amazing little piece. There was this great little alley that led anybody strolling along Sunset Boulevard into Peak, in between this, there's a cute little boutique of found fashion, like secondhand. And that's where, of course, our costume department. And then there was, girls had the little, all natural makeup stand. And so, of course, there was the makeup department. And then, Johnny O had hit a coffee bar. And so we had the best coffee in town. And then we had the guy who showed up who did Kung Fu tea, Gong Fu cha. So that was, it was just kind of this amazing space for hosting energy. And the muse was there. And so I built the green room. The expression green room in Hollywood goes all the way back to the origin of theater. in the Greek theater out behind the amphitheater where the actors donned their masks and took on the possession of the gods. It was a nature shrine, and there's lots of literature about what about the original green room, into whether it was Pan or Dionysus or Apollo, or you read Nietzsche or whatever. But that was what I was going for, was to channel the muse, the actual Holy Spirit, as a metaphysical force. That's creativity is like my religion, but it's also a science as well as an art. And that's where, when you first reached out, then El Cid was really magical place in a moment. And then I think I'm not sure if you came to Fireside Tales. Fireside Tale was over by then because it was like August. You met up with us at Rafa's, because when you first approached me about the project, I was going on at like 1 or 2 in the morning and doing my enchantment or incantation or whatever that space rock operetta acid jazz ballet thing was. And electronic spectacular, no, that's too pretentious. But I had makeup dripping off my face, and I'd be, coming down from being on stage, and suddenly I was kind of thrust back into the world I had left. I had fled Silicon Valley in search of my soul, and to be now doing due diligence on a technology project, because you had an IT issue of like, I had to understand what remained of Radio Titans. Like, were there hard drives? Is it on a server somewhere? Who has access to the server? Where are the passwords? All the due diligence on where the intellectual property was physically housed, stored, located, who had responsibility, keys, authority. So that was my process by which, when all that kind of came together, where it was clear you were a good guy, IP was pretty much free and clear. If anything, a lot of it was probably accidental public domain, but that didn't matter to me on the internet. Like, you wanted plenty of free stuff to give away to draw folks into the tent. So, and I think that's something that Hollywood missed early on, the freemium model for kind of subscription internet entertainment. So, we were experimenting with all that, and you called me and like, hey, I can't go. Can you go take a look at this space downtown? And I loved it right away because it was on the subway, so you could just jump, on the train in Hollywood or whatever. And then you were there, and it had this urban vibe, but also the Verizon Tower was originally, I think, a Pacific Bell installation, because it was essentially the communication center of the downtown nerve network of Los Angeles civilization. So it was definitely channeling some angelic energy, like muse static. I could feel it. And then when I walked in, I think it was Christina who was like, oh, I'm sorry, we've given the space away. And I was like, well, I'd still like to see it. And it was this, nasty little closet with a dark window looking at the other building. And then we, and then she's like, well, here's what we have instead, which we'll offer you at the same price. And then the doors open up, the Jesus rays beaming through the windows overlooking all of Los Angeles. I was like, we'll take it. The angels say we'll take it.
Wow, that's wild. And I heard that either you or somebody told me that it was that they partly offered such an amazing space because, well, one, the block was always mysteriously not able to get fully occupied, even though it was prime real estate. It was just bizarre that they couldn't fill it. And then two, because I was having a meltdown on the phone, and they were concerned for my mental well-being, so they went out of their way to like give us something nice to make up for it, because I was so distraught over losing the space with like 3 days before our opening. And so that was wild. But the vibe of the vibe of the block, I don't remember who talked about Lorna was talking about this, that it was interesting because it was a floor filled with offices. We were the only business that got away with putting a sign up on our door. Every other business there, for God knows what reason, it was against the rules to specify what you were. So it was this weird, completely anonymous warren of offices. And then every few feet in the halls, there was the same painting over and over. Lorna said it was a David Hockney painting. And it was like,
It was
why?
like,
Why would you put the same painting over and over? And I remember
yeah.
that when Rena Hundert speculated one night, and I've sadly lost this audio, but when Rena Hundert speculated that this was all a CIA front and you were involved, which I'll get into in a minute, she said, think about it, Carl. The offices, they're anonymous. The wall art made no sense. It was like hypnotizing.
The wall
This
art
is,
was really
and so
eerie.
Rena was saying this was all an MK Ultra experiment, you know, and anyway, so we kept getting away with murder because of you. You got us the 6-room suite. You know, and then there was other things like I never understood. It was in the lease that the hours are, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. or something, and somehow you managed to get us 24/7 access. I never understood. Were you like,
So sorry.
I wondered if you bribed them somehow, the guards. But what Zalim thinks was, he said you just convinced everybody. Well, listen, this is a workspace. Some of our people can only work at night, therefore they just waved everyone in. Is that what
Yeah.
happened? I mean, how did you get 24/7 access?
On white privilege.
Yeah, sorta, yeah.
That's ever since. That was the thing about going to inner city public high school. Is your little friends were always putting you up to stuff because like they'll listen to you. You're white, and you'll be like,
Yeah,
really?
yeah.
And
Wow.
so now that's how I got used to being the front man for whatever we were trying to pull. Because I could just be like, "Excuse me, Mr. Administrator, teacher, sir,"
Yeah.
and I could speak white. So and that was it was a fun skill to show off to the kids, but it was really funny how obvious it became, where, for example, I'm not going to call anybody up, but there was a certain girlfriend who was like batshit crazy stalker groupie, and we had told her, the security, do not let this woman in here. Do not let her on the elevator. We've had issues with her in the past. We had this whole thing. They can never stop her, and
Wow.
I'm entitled, West Side of a certain ethnicity in Los Angeles to whom all doors should open. And she, would not, and then we couldn't keep her out, right? Now, meanwhile, our regular artists, right, our regular show producers and artists, every time I could leave a list, I'd be like, you can let all these people in. Here's their names. You are welcome to check their IDs. These people are with the station. And every time the security guys be like, we got some characters down here for you. I'm like, yeah, well, who is it? Are they on the list? Please let them up. So it was the racial profiling or whatever. It was this corporate environment that had this institutional immune system that we had to, penetrate. It's like, not like Radio Titans was a disease. I'd like to think of it more of, how the stimulus to what they call somatic hypermutation, right? When the cells develop antibodies and we, because that's what we're doing when we heal, when our immune system works to learn a new disease, is it's a deep form of learning in the body, because the immune system is a very complex organ that determines essentially what is yourself and what is not yourself. So it is deeply tuned to the mind body, and often when you look at those social situations, those cultural bubbles that exist in Los Angeles, that's just groups of people behaving like a biological organism together. So I earned great respect for the psychic immune systems of people living in a vast cosmopolitan Babylon of a city. And so having to maintain their cultural bubbles as just sanity. but you have to negotiate, navigate that, because we got Salvies coming up and with drums in the elevator, and we need to get them on the show. So it was just really interesting kind of navigating the Angelino caste system in the process of pushing those boundaries and seeing what we could get away with.
Well, okay, so if you could talk about, everybody's commenting, or a lot of people have commented on the whole, how 3 of the 6 rooms, one became my office, which was awesome. Everybody gave me a really cool green desk, and I hung up wall art, and and I felt like it was like giving props to me, like I'm the boss, which was very, very nice. But then 3 of the other rooms became like residential spaces for you. You took over the one other room next to the studio.
That was an evolution. Yeah.
Yeah. How did that come about? Because Walton had one room, you had a room with a view,
Walton,
which you deserved, and then Zaleem had a 3rd room, eventually shared with Patrick.
Oh my God. Yeah. So let's take each one of those stories in turn of how this place accumulated
Humanity.
journeymen who were somewhere on their journey, So first of all, partly why I said yes was, at that point I was basically, broke, homeless, radical artist, dissident, intellectual, thinking that, what, for a guy who's like looking at 40, maybe I, take this opportunity to convert back into a way I know how to succeed in a worldly way, which is to frame your business as a technology startup and just basically live there and work all the time, and people will throw money at you. That's a formula I knew from growing up in Silicon Valley. So I thought, well, here's my chance. And since, what I was, took pride in being a Silicon soldier who slept under his desk and could, the most grueling startup schedule I could keep. So I thought, well, that's great. I just, luckily, I had family. I could go on the weekends and do laundry and, check in on them. And so it worked out. But mainly during the week, I'd gotten a fold out couch for my office, and I kept my office neat and clean. And I had just a little kind of Zen kitchen situation where I could, make very simple foods and stay healthy. And then I had the gym downstairs where I could bathe and work out. So I basically, was in advance of the downtown lifestyle. And when realizing that, okay, so that was my office, and then the studio was full all the time. When the kids realized that there was free time, where Edgar and Chelsea and all of them who were there from the beginning. And we should maybe kind of look at it from there, because first, it was first person I called to fill those blank walls was Lorna. And loved how she showed right up and had her gear. That's what always impressed me about her, was that not only was she an artist like all the other artists in LA, but she showed up, she did the retail marketing where she went door to door and was up at every dang cafe and space in Echo Park. You look up and there'd be a Lorna Alcana original. And I just had mad respect for her ability to grab wall space and get shown. That's just art hustle, and it was a wonder to see. And so and I love that she showed up and boom, did us right, and suddenly Radio Titans looked real.
Yeah.
And so Lorna, gets full credit, still being part of the gang with John Mark, part of the original trio who did Fireside Tales. He showed up and was willing to tackle the sound equipment and that technology. And then, of course, Edgar and the Blind Owl and that band, we met them. They opened for Feel at Rafa's and then played the opening show. It was interesting because there was some certain acts, more of the kind of sensitive folk kind of emo thing happening. They walked out of the party. They're like, nope, because we had a very South Central, I used to tease them calling it Blatin punk.
Yeah, that's funny.
And there was that. So that was the thing, is like, and I never really got any sleep there, because I would wake up in the middle of the night or 2 in the morning and I'd be like, what's that sound? Is someone recording in the studio? And I'd go out there, and Zolene would be jamming away, and there'd be like this whole Latin jazz band and people dancing and drinks. So, and I'd be like, damn you kids, almost. And then one of the girls would throw her arms around me and I'd be like, all right.
I remember
all night again.
well, I remember one time coming in, because my schedule was I worked Mondays and Tuesdays at the newspaper and Wednesdays till 1, and then I would come in Wednesday afternoons. I was there Monday nights for Pajama Party podcast. I'd come in Wednesday afternoons and on Thursdays and Fridays. And but I remember one time I came into the room. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning, probably a Thursday or Friday. And, and I thought everything would be up and running. But because you worked all night, I needed to learn how to respect that over time. Because I do feel bad. I have one memory where I threw open the door and you were waking up on the floor, like suddenly jolted awake, and you said, and there's my life. And I realized, oh shit, that's not cool. And so, I had to learn how to take what was a normal structure,
my self-pity and
adapt to what?
I was like, my self-pity and my obnoxious martyrdom. All forgiven, man.
Well, yeah. So, okay. So then we were always like, I think that a key part of the story is that we were great creatively, but we were not great businessmen. I certainly wasn't. And, you tried to teach me, let's not name names, because the number one example has been very cool in this part of this documentary. But there was, I was charging what we charged in Hollywood, which was much cheaper. And it was $200 a month for people to have a weekly show. And I made it clear that we don't guarantee you that the social media is enough. You have to take responsibility. Otherwise, we'd have to charge way more. And that is the truth. And I do think that $200, if we went much higher, we would have scared off a lot of people.
No, hold on. Let me stop you right there for your price point. The problem is that you shouldn't be afraid of scaring off people who aren't business. All right. The problem was you had no idea what would go into actually making a successful podcast. And in all honesty, neither did I. So you had no idea what the labor cost was, A. B, you also didn't know what the market would bear as far as what the market price would be. That perhaps there should be a few people who are paying enough that we can do the charity work that you feel called to do with whatever, act you're rescuing off the streets. Like that guy who found the horn player in the tunnel. You seem to always be dragging in strays. And I say that in good humor because I was too. And I wanted the resources to be able to invest in these unique talents that were completely overlooked by the industry, because the mid-level of the industry is so focused on bilking like the middle class of their children's budgets who they get from their parents to like make themselves stars. And so they want it done the easy way. And so they're willing to pay the sort of petit bourgeois, like this whole like cast of folks in LA who sort of prey on the dreams, right? And that's not to say that some of them don't do great work and make stars out of these kids who show up with some money in their pocket, whether they got it from their parents or stripping or what have you. And then there was the kids who sort of were so focused on the creativity and the invention and the art, it didn't occur to them really to whore themselves out to that extent, or to, and they didn't have the resources that family or whatever could blow on them making mistakes. So they were all kind of perfectionists in their way because survival demanded it. And their level of art was very high. And then they showed up with this can-do attitude, like they'll just figure out the tools, like they dial in their grandma's phone number. So that I love the idea of investing in a space where we could develop talent that showed that kind of drive. I mean, I think it's kind of funny because in a way it's a very conservative sort of Anglo cultural value, the whole, Max Weber's, the Protestant work ethic and the spirit of capitalism that I saw that I'm like, yep, that one's going places. That one's going places. Yeah, they can have a show. Yeah, they should do something. But that depended on ordinary accounts, business accounts, people who needed to produce a show because they were promoting their business or what have you. Those people can afford to invest in the new media by which they're attracting customers and building their brand and so forth. So a couple $100 is actually way below what they would expect, and they would think that they weren't getting really what they needed. That's why it's so important for the price to match people's expectation of what they're getting. And there's just a lot of psychology of sales and marketing that I guess for someone trained in journalism may not be obvious, but that's the kind of business education I was trying to impart to you in the process of reviving the place. Was you have to have a stable of well-paying clients to pay for the talent investments you want to make, if that's what you're doing. And I don't know if we ever had the conversation that we were an incubator. I think I saw the incubator dynamic develop and just went after it instinctively.
Yeah.
But that was, you were coming from a different culture. You come from like corporate media and the news.
Yeah.
And so you had a very strong idea of what media information and all the business, how that worked. Whereas, and that was what one of the exciting things about Radio Titans was. It was a total clash of cultures between the Silicon Valley way and the Hollywood way, and then the South Central way.
Huh. Interesting.
The downtown.
Well, so, one other key element that got this potential investor interested last night when I was talking to him was, I told him that for me, I said the way I look at this, and feel free to give your thoughts, is the story to me is, how did a conservative Catholic Republican guy, white guy also, and then a libertarian atheist, which is Belcher, and then I label you as perhaps wrongly, feel free to come up with a better label, but like this this intellectual hippie, and the three of us at different times, granted you didn't work with Belcher, he didn't work with you, but each of you was very important to each phase. So imagine those three mindsets team up, and we created an atmosphere. Hollywood had less of the freewheeling craziness, but it had some, and we did have the same principle. We just didn't have access.
Hollywood was.
But what I'm saying is that we had all across the board. My thing was, I don't care what your race is, your gender, who you're sleeping with, what your politics are. The only rule I had, which is kind of a silly one, which bit me in the ass, and I need to explain when it comes time for my interview. I only ever had to put my foot down once ever, and that was with Priscilla Barnes in my apartment phase. She tried to bring in some Playboy Playmates. I wanted nothing to do with the porn world ever at all.
No, you're not.
And otherwise, I let anything go, period. It was like, if you had something interesting to say, come on
other
down.
porn stars in there. It was just usually somebody's date. Like I think that because there was the Snatch Power, and then of course TNA coming on after Barbara Nicolosi, we were always having those sort of conflicts in social values. That was part of the frisson of the whole, speaking of some intellectual hippie shit, frisson is kind of part of the mix, like that's how it works. And it's funny to me that creativity itself is sort of a lost art. And I was raised in the craft. So stuff that's obvious to me of like, here's the tool, here's how it works. You put it here and you adjust it like that. Other people find completely mystifying. And there's a real mysticism about art making in Hollywood. I think that's why everyone gets stuck on Joseph Campbell or what have you, is they want to be told how to do it. And the whole trick is being told how to do it from a place other than the outer world. You know, the coming from inside trick is part of the magic. And when what's coming from the insides of different people then collide in real time, drama ensues, maybe comedy or tragedy or farce. But that's why that's the genesis of the joke about Radio Titans, Carl, where I started calling it a sitcom called Carl, right? It's just a very special episode of Carl today at Radio Titans. Here's what happened. Because if you had business expectations of it, and like most people, like obviously I felt like I was a bad person or doing something wrong, obviously, because I was like, this has no hope of ever making me money or famous and rich, or it's some kind of American value that matters. Why am I here? What am I doing? If this thing doesn't have a chance, because every day some sitcom absurd level of failure and our learning process made it just tragicomic. You know, it was pathetic with a B, because it was kind of so sad how messed up it was. I was clearly overwhelmed. You know, I couldn't both be business lead, spending time, you know, prospecting accounts, closing business, writing contracts, and chief technical officer, you know, slapping people's hands at the controls when they're fighting over, you know, how to do the recording of the sound or what have you, and mastering all the software for the various, because iTunes was a dominant platform at the time. And then, you know, we had these other podcatchers we were trying to end up in. And so all of the web optimization stuff for the evolving audioscape quickly I realized was way beyond, you know, my abilities as far as time and energy, as well as juggling the other balls. And since everybody else was kind of wanted to be an artist, I was sort of left with all the moving parts. And that was kind of what I learned from it, was my egotism of my, what Edgar called invincible white man, where it's like the superhero complex that you carry. That's the sort of flip side of the white privilege or whatever, the noblesse oblige of like, you're expected to be Superman, and when you're not, you're a huge disappointment to everybody. I mean, even the people who want to tear you down and wish you weren't Superman are disappointed in you. And okay. it's like having to walk away from Radio Titans with just nothing but memories, and like basically even Steven like hadn't made anything you know, on paper at least, and walked away leaving it in you and John Mark's capable hands. But for me, ready for my next project, which had come out of exposure I'd gotten through Radio Titans. So I'm super grateful for it always. You know.
Yeah. Well,
so then I had to actually date somebody after that, because here I was in Hollywood, and you don't have time to enjoy life. Like, what's the point?
Yeah. Well, you know, and then there was, I remember one key amazing moment where we were always just barely managing to pull off keeping the rent going and all that stuff there. And one day I forget what happened, but I screwed something up royally, and we were going to be $800 down on what we owed for rent with like a day to figure it out. And you were like, hey, I'm talking with these Japanese businessmen down the hall, and they're kind of interested in a podcast about business, and I'm proposing it. It's called Wei Ji, and I'm going to go down there and see what I can pull off. And you came back with like, I think it was like $2,000 check, and you held it up like the baby in the Lion King, like, oh, and and we were set suddenly magically for another 2 months. And it was moments like that that were just like amazing to me, that because also before we ever opened, 3 days, it was literally like 3 to 5 days before we were supposed to sign the lease on the block, I needed to come up with about, I think it was $1,700. And I can't remember how I did it, but I had no money with like 3 to 5 days left. None of it was showing up. And I kept telling you, it's going to happen. It's going to happen. And you were starting to worry, and you were frustrated because we'd been talking since September. And here I still didn't have the money lined up with like 3 to 4 days to spare. And then suddenly that fell into my lap, and we were able to go, here, we're flush with money. Let us rent your space. And it was just this crazy, beautiful luck that we would have at the worst moments. I don't know. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, obviously, if you believe in luck,
Yeah.
what force intervened, what energies actually motivate the forces of the universe, who knows? I noticed that the universe responds really intelligently to stimulus and is very reproductive. So it sort of conforms to all our scientific definitions of alive. And it really is it's a matter of hair splitting to decide what's organic or not. But that was kind of my theory of life, was that when you're doing the right thing, the resources appear. It goes back, it's Goethe actually, speaking of a guy who was a scientist and a wizard, as well as a literary great, invented German Romanticism pretty much single-handedly. And he was always talking about the boldness of and magic of just doing something, just, going with that impulse and starting it. And so that kind of thing and then also trusting in my abilities, when it's for a good cause, I can close a deal. But that one is all the credit goes to David Wu, who was, in the old Los Angeles sense, Chinatown boss, but that was the Asian American Economic Development Enterprises. And they were one of the straight-laced firms that were watching us, because they also were lawyers. They were attorneys, and that was the main organization that they ran. And they were watching what we were doing and really intrigued. And so, David Wu passed away a few years ago.
Oh, darn. I was just reading about.
But he was a big believer in us. And what I pitched to him was Weiji. Weiji is, that name word in Chinese for danger and opportunity. That's Weiji. And Weiji, actually, it was funny. The first interview I did was with the Hong Kong trade delegate, and she told me the story. Like, now in modern Hong Kong parlance, Weiji means dangerous opportunities, like what Americans are into, right? It has this American connotation because it was quoted by both Kennedy and Nixon in famous speeches by then, that there is a word in Chinese that means that there's danger there. In danger lies opportunity, right? Well, that was actually a mistranslation. It was an American missionary in China, a Presbyterian minister, I think, who, in his study of the Chinese language, thought that the particle was related, which it is. It's related to a particle for danger, but actually for opportunity. But actually, Weiji in Chinese at that time just meant dangerous. And what was hilarious was it was an American misapprehension that saw the opportunity in the danger ideogram, in the actual character for danger. We recognized something that is actually related to the particle meaning opportunity. So then it became this idea, Weiji, and then after, of course, Kennedy and Nixon say it, now it has this connotation back in Chinese that it's a sort of American style dangerous opportunity. And so, of course, I thought that's why I pitched them as a perfect name for like an Asia Pacific business news magazine, which was the podcast that they purchased. But that sort of fun creativity was a product of thinking creatively all every day there at Radio Titans, being able to cultivate creativity in your culture of the people who are bringing energy every day, some of them for free, an expectation that they'd have fun and maybe make some money. That volunteer energy is really sacred and special, and it's so wasted by so many institutions in this world. For me, it's always been the raw stuff of real excitement. So, but you can translate that to economic success because creativity is pure energy, and it's more precious than diamonds and gold.
Okay, so we're running out of time on your end. So I have two more questions. One, I'd like to get your thoughts about our events, because I think that was very unique. I don't think, when I'm telling people that we staged epic pool parties and an office party that had 102 people sign in over 8 hours, and we had 8 bands play in the
Oh my
office
God.
suite. Women were dancing so hot and sweaty they're down to their bras by 1 in the morning. And then the pool party was so epic that the police were called 3 times, and the complaints were coming in from 2 miles away because of the
Yeah.
sound level. And just nobody was doing that in the podcasting world ever at that
Nobody was
time, and
doing it
probably
in
not
Hollywood.
since.
It just blew me away that you get that sort of noisy event happening in people's mansions in the hills, but what, the middle class can't have fun? Well, evidently not. That's what blew me away, was that the people who thought they were going to be rich and famous and just ended up in an apartment in Koreatown were so upset with the rest of the world. They used to call the LAPD on us down Sunset Boulevard, and the LAPD would show up, and I'd be like, "Yeah, officer, you realize this is Sunset Boulevard, right? This is like coming up with a noise complaint for the factories in Detroit, being like, I'm sorry, your neighbors are trying to sleep. You gotta stop making cars." So, no, this is Sunset Boulevard here. We manufacture rock and roll. This is a 24-hour business. And if you want some sleep, you need to move somewhere else. You can't move to Sunset Boulevard hoping your life is going to be cool and then call and complain when someone has the balls to have a cool party down the street. At least put on some clothes and go and crash the party like a decent human being. You know what I mean? That's what we would do in San Francisco. If people have this, if you hear like techno at 2 a.m. and you put on your day glow green pajamas and go say hello.
Well, okay, so what do you think? The last question is, what do you think our accomplishment was on a social level of, like John Eder thinks that we did something revolutionary, and that we were setting an example of how American democracy ought to be, because we, especially now with the times being so fractious these last 4 or 5 years since we stopped doing the major eras of stuff. Trump came in, and the media and the Democrats and Trump all just went at each other's throats like bulldogs, turned the whole country inside out against each other. And we set an example of, this is how everybody can get along. Everybody can have a voice. Everybody can have fun together. And John thinks that's a really deep thing. And so, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it was so surprising what a problem everyone had with that. I'm like, really? I mean, think of a band if like Fela Kuti and Santana had a baby. You know what I mean? Like, this is the greatest music ever. Why are, we're literally manufacturing fresh music from ingredients around the world, all like brewed at home, free range, kids, grass-fed usually in the public school system.
And grass-fed in the joints, of course.
Right? So it was just kind of, for me, that's what's always mystified me, is why is it like, I'm not really the only person who sees this, right? This is why I end up hanging out with artists and intellectuals and circus freaks and stuff, because I'm like, you seeing this? Yeah, okay, you're seeing this too. Okay, all right, I'm not the only person who's like, why it's Friday night, where's the rock and roll, right? Like, who's in charge of that? Oh, nobody's in charge of having a good time? Well, then I'm reporting for duty. You know what I mean? Like, because this is the American way. It's like, I'm not gonna allow like grumpy people whose lives didn't go the way they thought they were, with sticks up their butt, to like ruin everything, especially all these other childhoods that are just getting started. It just seemed unjust. It was wrong. Like everybody in Hollywood was so busy trying to hump the talent that nobody was making anything good, with the sole exceptions of, the funny thing was, I finally, the person I met was like, well, have you seen this? Have you seen that? And I was like, no, I haven't seen anybody else's stuff. I make stuff here. I don't have time to look at other stuff. And that's what I thought kind of sad. I'm like, I don't have time to lie around with this girl in Hollywood and watch stuff that turns her on. I need to reprioritize my life. And that was the magic of the Radio Titans journey, was realizing that was the stuff of life. If you blinked, you missed it. But the being there at the birth of internet entertainment culture, where this kind of Silicon Underground could explode into plain sight in the street. I mean, that's why Burning Man always sort of offended me. And again, one of my good friends who are instrumental in that scene, it's inspired me as well. Like the whole Northern California festival scene was a lot of the sensibility I had tried to convey, because I thought it would be commercially successful for the kids to ride that train. And so I kind of brought a lot of that sensibility with me, but it slammed straight into the old industry that was crumbling down around our ears at the time. Although, because it was the platinum age of television, because like the internet, between Netflix and everything had really finally gotten Hollywood's attention, but they had no idea what to do about it. With the exception of obviously a few people who are, on the ball. And everybody else has been racing to keep up. And a lot of people are just exhausted from the race. I think it's left a lot of people behind. I think in the rush to be newer and better and greater and more cutting edge than the other guy, you lose a lot of the audience. And it's important to go back to basics and connect with people again. That's part of the cycle too. I think it's wonderful that Radio Titans has sort of laid fallow all these years, and everybody's gone on to do and seed other projects and propagate the ideas that they found attractive. That's what's really special about this is, hearing about all their adventures, and, some are successful as artists and others have gone on to be artistic in other parts of their lives.
Okay. I think that's all I need for right now. You gave me great answers. So hang on, I'm going to pause